So this work on GDP, this work on alternative metrics to GDP, like the GPI, this genuine progress indicator, is really fundamentally about our economic well-being. But again, as ecological economics wrestle with that concept of how do we allocate scarce resources toward our alternative desirable ends, those desirable ends are both economic well-being, but there are other types of well-being. And more we're calling that quality of life. So it's the whole puzzle. It's what contributes from our economic life to our total quality of life, what contributes from our social life to our total quality of life, what contributes from our human capabilities, our knowledge, our skill set, our job satisfaction, how does that contribute to our quality of life, and also what kinds of services do we get from our environment that contribute to our quality of life. In ecological economics, we've taken kind of a capital stock approach to that. We've borrowed this from economics to say that capital is not just the human-made built capital. Okay, we don't need to track just that as a component of our economic well-being or our total well-being. We also need to track our social capital, those interpersonal relationships that we have, the relationships that we have as human societies, including governance and law and different kinds of institutions. We need to keep track of our human capital, so those investments that are made in ourselves, in our spirituality, in our education, in our skill sets. And we need, of course, to keep track of our natural capital assets, so the natural environment and all of those services that provide us assets and contribute to our overall well-being. And when you go and ask people, about their quality of life, they sort of gravitate to those categories, and they can prioritize those categories as well. Very often, for example, social well-being or social capital ranks quite high amongst in questionnaires where people are asked to rate the different contributions to their quality of life. And so it becomes kind of the economic question, the question about economic development becomes a balancing act between these capital assets. And a balancing act that again recognized that there are clear limits to substitution amongst these capital assets. It's not just about more manufactured capital, more built capital, even though all the incentives are in that direction. It's about maintaining that balance between the various assets that we have at our disposal. So total quality of life, while it's hard to kind of put your finger on what total quality of life is, it's about both meeting our needs and contributing to our desires, contributing to our wants. When we revisit that question of what our desirable ends are, and we start to answer it in terms of the quality of the human experience, we also revisit questions of kind of the hierarchy of needs. The quality of the human experience is in part meeting our basic needs, but it's in part also meeting our wants, our desires. The wants part is also relative. So my desires I measure in comparison to my peers or in comparison to other people in my society. And again, ecological economics doesn't shy away from the question of distribution, because the distribution of both the benefits and burdens from economic cooperation very much plays back into my individual well-being. If we don't take into account the distribution of resources, we're really not answering that question of total well-being.
Natural capital contributes to quality of life in many different ways that we're beginning to understand and trying to understand better. But so does social capital contribute to quality of life, and so that's another understudied area. How do people's institutions and networks and all the formal and informal relationships between people contribute to quality of life? And what can we do to enhance that? And certainly some of our economic activities that lead to wider gaps in income, that negatively affects social capital, because it prevents people from interacting, over a broader range of individuals. So if we took as our goal, if we really took seriously the goal of enhancing quality of life and its sustainability, then I think our policies would be very different. We'd first have to understand that connection, but I think our policies would be not so focused on just increasing economic marketed activity. That's only going to be a positive contributor to quality of life up to a certain relatively low threshold, we're finding. And so you can think of, the U.S. and Western Europe as being largely overdeveloped economies, or obese economies. We're kind of doing too much in that area and not enough in some of these other areas. We should focus here on more of the social capital and the natural capital components, whereas other countries are still underdeveloped in the conventional terms. And so by us reducing our material consumption and focusing more on these other aspects of quality of life, that would leave more ecological space for these other countries to increase their conventional production and consumption, and converge on a higher quality of life for everyone.
We're talking about what is quality of life. Well, we want to define it. It's very difficult to define objectively, quantitatively. We're not talking quantity of life. We're talking quality of life. And so, some of the ways we have for measuring this are simply to ask people subjective well-being. How happy are you on a scale of 1 to 10? How satisfied are you with your life as a whole? I really do think that the most important thing is to recognize that humans have certain needs that need to be met. And I do think that some of the best research on that was done by Manfred Max Neef, and listing these discovering that these human needs that are constant across cultures and across time, he puts together a list of these 9 different human needs that are subsistence, affection, creation, participation, leisure, which he really refers to as idleness, freedom, identity, creativity or creation, understanding. These are things every human needs, and we don't just need to have these things. It's not just a question of what you have. Conventional economists only measure what you have. It's a question of who you are, of being. What is your role in producing these things? It's a question of interacting with others in producing these things. I tend to define quality of life as your ability to satisfy your wants and needs. 2 ways to do that then is either to increase your ability to satisfy or decrease your wants and needs. What Manfred Max Neef argued is that we are actually satiable. We can satisfy our wants and needs. There is so much thing as enough. He also recognized, though, that often we fail to choose the correct satisfiers. So we think that by doing this, we will become will satisfy that need. Some people think that as they drink that they get more, that as they drink they get more they're better able to participate and become more affectionate, but then they get sloppy drunk and fail miserably, vomit on their date's lap, and they've chosen the wrong way of satisfying a need for affection. And advertising constantly tells us you need this to be satisfied. It creates a want without increasing our ability to satisfy it. So if quality of life is your ability to satisfy your wants and needs, and advertising increases wants without increasing ability to satisfy, then it systematically undermines our quality of life.